Hi all, this is Charlie from Keep Drawing Charlie. Welcome to my technical video on how I made Tatsuko, this beautiful dragon puppet. I made this giant thing completely from scratch with no prior experience in puppet making and nobody telling me what to do. It's a long video, but I go through almost every aspect of this build, all the problems and the errors and all the fixes I made. I hope it's helpful, informative and interesting to watch. Let's get going. It started, as most of my ideas do, with a lot of sketches and rough illustrations of the character in mind. This one was the sketch I referenced the most during the build. While still in the idea phase, I tried sculpting out the head with super sculpting. I wasn't particularly pleased with the outcome, but at the time it helped me to work out what I wanted in a 3D sense because really I'm a 2D artist. Can sculpt, don't know a whole lot about it, so I tried my hardest. But I did actually go back and later resculpt it after watching an amazing video by Kazuo Cosplay. She made a hyena puppet head and explained how she sculpted first and then blew up a template from that. So I took that idea to heart and used it to create this sculpt and then take a pattern from it later on and use that to make the final head. I carefully cut off the pattern, laid it flat, and making sure I cut darts where I needed because it was quite round in places. Scanned it in, blew it up to 300%. And here's what it looked like when I made a test version out of kids craft foam. Very colourful, actually. This is the first iteration of the body sock, basically, that was to give me an idea of how it would all look. Then came the tedious job of blowing it up to 400%, drawing it all out onto a 6mm sheet of plastizote, cutting it all out with a nice sharp craft knife, and then using contact glue to piece it all together like a complicated puzzle cube. Here's what it looks like next to the test copy and the original sculpt. I made sure to fix the hole in the bridge of the nose. The lower jaw was relatively simple. The tongue was plastizote again, textured with the hot end of a glue gun. The teeth were all cut out of foam and given several paints of white acrylic to close all the tiny holes. This could definitely have been tackled another way with better materials, but I only had what was on hand at the time and I wanted to keep the head as light as possible. I finished off with a layer of paper mache and cotton wool to give the gun some texture. The blink mechanism was needlessly complicated. Please, 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 if you're going to do this, keep your eyes facing the same direction on the same horizontal plane. If I had realised how much extra work this was going to be, I would have gone back and just changed the head to get the eyeballs on straight. It's not worth the hassle. Check out the description below for links on various helpful videos if you're trying to get your blink mechanism to work, and do not do what I did. At the very least, in this video you can see how I tackled it. The initial idea was to run a thin copper tubing through the ping pong ball for the eye, and about a third of a plastic Christmas tree ornament for the eyelid. Then we're going to jump to a photo much later in the build just to explain some of the extra parts to you. I awkwardly bent some even thinner but very sturdy copper wire into funky shapes with a lot of trial and error, and superglued extra plastic to the back of the eyelid and threaded it through. This allowed me to pull the eyelids back and forth by pushing down on the wire. The rubber bands hold everything in place with enough resistance to keep the eyes open, but also give way easily to pressure without pulling anything out of place, which is unfortunately what was happening when I was trying to use miniature springs instead. A simple split ring in the thread gave me somewhere to easily thread my finger to pull down and make the eyes blink. Okay, enough on the horror that is the blinking mechanism, back to the actual build. Here are the tests I did for painting the eyeballs. I put out a vote on social media and most folks confirmed that the full eye paint worked better than just painting around and leaving the whites of the eye. onto sculpting the feetsies out of a large block of what I assume was upholstery foam we just had sort of lying around the house. As you can see, I'm not great at sculpting inwards. It's quite confusing. I've never done it before. Barely sculpt outwards these days. But I learned to take it slowly. Again, you can always take off more, but adding it back on again is hard and it looks a bit gross, as you saw previously. Big thanks to the fursuiting community for putting out so many tutorials on how to sculpt feet and things. Very convenient. Thank you kindly. Now on to the remaking of the body sock. The old one, as good as it was and as functional as it was, I'd cut into it and I'd edited and I'd added so many parts during the trial and error phases that it was actually getting too lumpy in the wrong sort of areas. So cut out a new one out of another bedsheet and changed over the stuffing. And yes, that is an old towel going in there. It actually gives me some weight on my shoulders and keeps it from slipping off as much, because otherwise it's just full of stuffing instead. I'm doing a lot of checking. I'm actually running out to the mirror just to make sure that it's lying on me properly. A lot of pinning to get in the curves, and we're back into the head. So this is the padding out with the basic structure using more foam and more contact glue. Side note on the contact glue, please make sure you open a window or work in a well ventilated area when using this stuff. It's potent and I gave myself a horrible headache when I first used it. You get used to the smell and you don't notice after a while, so please take precautions. I hadn't realised it was the glue until somebody stepped into the room an hour after I'd already got my headache and went, wow, it stinks in here, what is that? So put myself out of commission for an evening. Don't do the same. Please open some windows. Please be smart. Please don't be me. Considering this is the first time I've ever done anything like this, there was always going to be mistakes. One of which is the bottom jaw doesn't actually line up properly with the top jaw. It's entirely too small. Even with this extra foam padding I'm adding at the moment, it doesn't line up very well until I sort of go back in. So there's me in the evening here trying to fix everything, trying to glue stuff down and trying to work it out. Even with the extra bulk on both sides, you can see that there is a lot of extra foam, even when trimming it down and trying to make it into a nice curve here. So actually that evening I left it, came back to it in the morning and actually cut part of the foam jaw out and the teeth out and moved it all down a bit so it fills out the bottom jaw a lot nicer. And then they got antlers, and my face was horrible in this photo, so you don't get to see it. At this point the puppet is realised enough to fool the eye. This is when things started to get really interesting. This video gave me a lot of confidence. People online really enjoyed it as well, and I knew I was onto a winner, and we were getting there. We were getting there slowly, but we were getting there. Tatsuko is actually modelled after sort of Asian dragons, long dragons with antlers and ears and big long whiskers. And hopefully it'll get there. Patterning the face with the standard duct tape method. Note to everyone else, use far more duct tape than I did. Lots of small pieces, not large ones. But we got there. In the end I had to hand sew most of the face fur. My sewing machine just wasn't playing with the way the pile worked and I was not skilled enough to force it to work. Test fabric to work out how to pattern the mane. The puppet is functionally three parts, the head, the body and the hoodie that gives it the fake arm illusion. Here it is in where it shall start on the head. So the horn's got a spray paint of gold and then a wash of sepia tone to give it some depth and bring out the little wrinkles in the paper mache. If possible I would have loved to have got some light plastic horns, but I don't have the facilities to make something like that unfortunately. So let's go. We paper mache'd the nose, painted it before I put any of the fur on. The nose is meant to be based off of the lion's nose, but it does extend entirely too far backwards. In the end I just sort of lent into the cartoony aspect of it, also purple contrasts nicely with the pale and cold colour palette of the build. There was a lot in this where I sort of just had to accept what I'd done previously because there was too much to change otherwise. So if possible I'd like to go back, or the next time I make one, or if I ever remake Tatsuko, I think I would give them a nose more befitting of Asian culture dragons, so not a wet dog type nose, but the mannerisms of this puppet are very much based on dogs, because it's easier to read, and as someone who doesn't really do puppeteering, that's the easiest thing for me to pick up and use as well. So doing a lot more painting, getting the inside of the mouth done, top and bottom. Time to apply the fur. At this point the mane had been cut and sewn into place along with the ears, and all that was left was to glue everything down. Note to everybody, make sure you trim down your seams on your fur fabric as much as you dare. I had unwanted lumps in the face unfortunately due to the seams laying quite badly. Also getting the fur around the eye was an absolute mess. I apologise for the hack job. Again, I'd never done anything like this before. I do cover up the mistakes with some dry brushing later, so it's not the worst thing. But yeah, try not to judge too harshly. And here they are in their fluffy glory. They can't see a darn thing out of those eyes right now. Everything needs trimming down. So I took these photos for my own reference because it's hard to see the back of the puppet when it's on you. Wanted to make sure that the legs did hang nicely on somebody. And these were photos I took to show just how big the puppet had become. They were very, very big. Eventually it was time to trim down the face. I'd seen fursuiters use hair clippers on fur fabric, so I gave it a go with the set that we own, but the pile of fabric I used was far too short to actually catch on the clippers. I tried to go back to it quite a few times in this time lapse, but ultimately I realised it wasn't going to work, and I used a pair of good old sharp ass scissors and went at all the fur. Thankfully Tatsuko is a good model and held still while I worked out how to go about it. The end look isn't entirely smooth, but it works for the puppet and it doesn't look out of place. And as I got more used to dealing with cutting away larger swathes of fur, I became more confident with it, and I think it came out quite nicely. Then it was on to patterning paws and parts of the legs that were going to be covered in scales. Initially the plan was to sew these pieces together, but I had come to loathe hand stitching, and a lot of this fur would be covered in scales admittedly, or it just not looked at as closely as the face. So I took a hot glue gun and glued those suckers down, using contact glue in larger areas as well. So the seams are more noticeable on the arms where the two pieces line up, but there's not a whole lot of attention going on the arms. People are usually far more interested in the face. So we get away with it. You gotta do what you can. Time for belly rubs! I did add the belly fur on here and forgot to take photos of it. Sorry. So here's the casual character and puppet test done for the work so far. You can see the fluffy belly fur here, and a slit was made in the long fabric so I could thread my arm through and straight into the head. At this point the legs are just pinned on, but now everything has the right shape, in the right places, and it means it's onto the final stretch of this build. Here are some photos of the shaved face, so you can see it up closer. Yeah, it's a bit shaggy. You learn to live with it, and you love them anyway. And here's the glow up! Everything here was dry brushed, as I don't actually own an airbrushing kit, and I don't have the funds to invest in one just for this project. Maybe in the future though, if this is something I do more of. Time for the scales! I lucked out on the fact that my mum owns a cricket machine, and allowed me use of it. So I bulk purchased sheets of white craft foam, made a template in Photoshop, and set this cutting machine to do its job. Unfortunately, even after going through the machine twice, the scales didn't pop out perfectly, so some of them needed a hand or a few extra cuts to remove them from the sheet. After that, it's a case of sticking on your favourite YouTube nonsense and painting copious amounts of scales. The colours I went for were pearlized blue and turquoise green. Subtle, but the colour change keeps it from looking too samey. For both the tail and the arms, I had actually had two different sizes of scales cut out. It meant that I could introduce a gradient and stop the scales from looking too bulky around small areas like the toes and the tip of the tail. Here's a scale test of the tip of the tail, all small scales on this photo. And this one as well. The painstakingly long, tedious and stabby process of sewing lines of scales on. Another case of putting on your favourite podcast or movie and just sewing until you've gone cross-eyed. Sewing the scales onto the belly fabric means that there's an easy overlap to blend the scales into the fur. After all the scales were applied, I went back over the edges of the hot glue gun and glued the surrounding fur down to hide the transition a little better. Somebody loves pushing! And this was the mess of the room I claimed as my own for over 6 months of this build. Time to sew the legs on! And here are some photos to show just how ludicrously big this thing actually was. Final touches, the claws were made from Super Sculpey, painted, varnished and just hot glue gun on. Worked perfectly. Also I dry brushed around the toes to give it more depth. The face received some extra scales and some darker eyebrows, as I am wont to put on all my creations. I also jimmied and glued 2 pipe cleaners in for the whiskers. And here's another video of Tatsuko being puppeted when I'm in my full character outfit. Thanks for watching all the way through to the end. I have already recorded another video where I talk about the build in a more casual sense and show off more about the new features I've put into it. So subscribe now if you want to see that as soon as it's released. You can find me anywhere by googling Keep Drawing Charlie, and I'll leave links in the description to all my social medias and my website. Leave a like and a comment to help others see the video, and please pass it on if you think it'll help something out. See you soon!